What's up, everybody, and welcome to One Man's Opinion. Now, before we get started, I'm going to be talking about a couple of different things throughout the last couple of weeks of October. Number one, right now we're going to be talking about A Nightmare on Elm Street, but we're also going to be covering the original Friday the 13th and the original Halloween. And that's important for me to note. It is the original of all three. All three have been remade. All three are horror classics. They are staples in the spooky film genre, and they are original OGs of the slasher film genre as well. And we're going to be covering all three of those, starting with A Nightmare on Elm Street. Just so you know, I'm going to be comparing them just a little bit, not a whole lot, because I want to look at them independently. And keep in mind, we're going to be talking about the scares and things like that. It doesn't really matter that Nightmare on Elm Street came out a few years after the rest of them. So A Nightmare on Elm Street came out in 84. Friday the 13th in 1980, and Halloween came out in 1978. We're looking at the scariest film. We're looking at the most iconic character. We're looking at the intelligence behind the writing, the design of the character, the story, those kind of things. The same things we always look at in movies. We're not looking at which one came out first, because you can't say Nightmare came out last so it loses points. That's not fair. You wouldn't say that a movie that came out in 2020 was less scary because it came out today. Now, that doesn't mean that Halloween doesn't get points for being the more original, but don't get confused. Halloween is not the original slasher film, okay? It's not the first horror movie that has a serial killer stalking teenage girls, has POV kills from the eyes of the killer. It's not the first movie to do that, though it is often credited as the first to do it. It's credited that way because it's the first to really make it a staple, okay? It kind of set off the slasher film genre, but it was not the first to do it, okay? You can actually find one made 2 years before that called A Black Christmas, which had all of those elements. It was a slasher film, POV from the killer, serial killer who chased down teenage girls. The whole 9 yards came out 2 years before Halloween ever did. So don't come at me with that bull crap. I know my facts. Anyway, I say all that to say I'm going to be as impartial as I possibly can. I'm going to judge them just as horror films, not as, oh, this one came out here, this one came out there. When I look at special effects and that sort of thing for the movie, that will come into consideration of what year did the movie come out. So could the special effects have been better for that time? That sort of thing. But anyway, we'll cover more of that when we get to it. But for today, we're looking at A Nightmare on Elm Street. A Nightmare on Elm Street is the 1984 horror classic from the twisted mind of Wes Craven. And look, I always try to start out with the negatives, okay? And I'm not going to lie, I'm a little biased toward Nightmare. I really like Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm going to try to take all that bias out, though. We're going to look at just some of the facts. Some things obviously are going to be opinion-based, but, it's one man's opinion, so get over it. So as for the negatives, I try to think of what the negatives for A Nightmare on Elm Street could be. And that's going to be difficult with all three of these films as we go forward, because they are such horror classics. There's not a whole lot you can pick apart with these, so I'm going to do my best to kind of get in the mind of a critic and try to overthink some of it. The first thing that I came up with is that Freddy is kind of a cartoon character of a killer. Especially later in his movies, he kind of becomes more of a comedic killer than a serious one. But we're not talking about the rest of the movies. We're just talking about the first 1984 original Nightmare on Elm Street. And that really doesn't apply here. He's not a comedic character. It's very serious. It's very scary. There are a lot of horrific scenes. There's a lot of blood. And yeah, he does make a few of his puns. He does make a few of his little comments, but it's not nearly to the degree that we see in his later films. And I don't think it does anything to take away from the movie. Now, the only other thing I could really come up with is toward the end of the film, right there at the end when he's fighting Nancy in her home. He's kind of just this huge klutz, and he's like stumbling around, and he's getting the crap kicked out of him by a teenage girl, and it is a little bit laughable, and you might say it takes away from the horror, from the scariness of Freddy a little bit to see him just get completely manhandled at the end of the film by this female. But actually, it makes a lot of sense from a narrative point of view, and if something makes a lot of sense from a storytelling aspect, then it's okay, even in a horror film. So consider this. Freddy is used to living in his dream world. In his dream world, he has absolute control of the situation. He can play with his food as much as he wants to because he knows he can take their life at any time. Suddenly he finds himself in the dream world, And at first, he may not even know that he's in the dream world, okay? This has never happened to him. Since he died, he has never, as far as we're aware, found himself in the dream world. So at first, he may be like, of course, this isn't said, but you could imagine that likely he thinks he still has absolute control, so he's not taking the fight very seriously until he realizes, okay, this isn't a dream anymore. And when does he realize it? When he first feels pain. Now, that's something else you need to consider. Freddy Krueger would be a lot like a child or like a baby in the sense that he hasn't felt pain in a very long time. Babies cry so much, or at least I've heard it said, that babies cry so much because every little feeling is new to them. It's something they've never felt before. And so pain to a baby is very surreal. It's very intense. It hurts a lot to a baby. And for Freddy, it would be very similar. This man has been living in his own world where he is essentially a god, and he can do whatever he wants. He has not felt pain in a very long time. So to feel pain for the first time in a long, long time would be a shock to his system and would slow him down. Also, let's consider that now that he's in the real world, he's not that godlike figure anymore. And in fact, he's just the guy he was before he became Freddy Krueger. The guy he was before he became Freddy Krueger was a janitor. He was a pedophilic janitor. There's no reason this guy should be a track star or an athlete. It makes sense that he's a klutz. He's just this loser. And so when he's pulled into the real world, not only does he lose all that godlike power, not only does he feel pain again, but he's also just his normal loser self with his little glove. And so, yeah, it makes sense that he would be caught off guard, that he wouldn't be the most athletic guy, that with Nancy having the home field advantage on him, knowing where she is, she knows that she's set up traps. She turned her house into a Macaulay Culkin Home Alone dungeon of torture and mayhem. She even had a sledgehammer just rigged up so that it would fall down and hit him as he opened the door. She had a lot of things ready for him. He was completely thrown off guard, and so it makes sense from a narrative standpoint, so I give it a pass. Freddy is horrifying up until that point, and there's no reason to say, well, he loses points because, no, it makes sense. And not to mention, he doesn't die. Freddy comes back at the very end of the film. You see Nancy has fallen back asleep, and you see Freddy pull her mom through a window, and so Freddy still lives. And that's about all I got for the negatives. So let's move on to the positives. Okay, now what does A Nightmare on Elm Street do well? Number one, let's talk about the idea. Let's talk about the mind of Wes Craven and what genius it is. This is my favorite part of A Nightmare on Elm Street. It is the genius of Wes Craven to set this character up. If you've never really thought about how incredibly intelligent this concept is, take a seat. Let me educate you a little bit. Consider that there are only so many things that the human body needs to survive. Now, we're taught in school all the time, food, water, shelter, right? Those are the three things the human body needs to survive. But actually, there is a fourth. Your body needs sleep. At some point, you have to sleep. And how intelligent, how smart of Wes Craven to take something that the body has to have, the body needs sleep, and to turn it against you so that kids are fighting to stay awake. We all have nightmares as young kids. We all have experienced horrific nightmares that kept us up in the middle of the night. We've all had a nightmare that woke us up and we didn't go back to sleep almost the rest of the night, or maybe it kept us up for a few hours. We've all been there. We've all experienced that fear. Imagine that not only is that nightmare staying with you, but every time you close your eyes, you continue to have it. And beyond that, that nightmare actually can kill you in your sleep. It is genius, and you top it off with such an intimidating character like Freddy Krueger. Now, he's not intimidating like Michael or like Jason. He's not this huge hulking figure that can just pick you up and throw you across the room. But because he owns your dream, because he can literally do anything, he can do all those things that Freddy or Jason can do, plus some. He can literally toy with you, turn himself into anything. He can do whatever he wants to. While you're in that dream, you're his plaything. He owns you. So you combine all that into one package, and then you put it in this movie that is so well executed, and you've got a real winner on your hands. But this is a horror movie, so let's talk about the scares. Let's talk about the creep factor. Let's talk about all the things that make Nightmare on Elm Street a classic. The scares in A Nightmare on Elm Street are so good. First of all, the first kill on camera is so good. And and I can't think of her name right now. Nancy's friend dies in that bedroom. The sheets are ripped off of her. Her clothes are opened up, and you see that first claw mark come down, and you see her body just kind of open up under those wounds. And then she's drugged. She floats up in the air, and she's drugged up onto the ceiling, and you can tell, it's so odd, but if you watch close, you can tell she's trying to like crawl away from Freddy. So you don't see what's happening in the dream anymore, but you can see her trying to crawl across the ceiling as she's still asleep in her mind, but she's still fighting. Her living body's still fighting, even though she's asleep, and Freddy essentially has her right where he wants her. Her boyfriend, helpless to do anything, sits in the corner of the room and watches as her body is just torn apart on top of the ceiling. And it's so good. The effects are really good. And yes, it does count for the time, but even by today's standards, because practical effects, that's the beauty of practical effects, is that even throughout time, they only diminish very little diminish on practical effects. If you watch a horror movie right now from 2008 and it was heavy on CGI, if you watch that in 2020, you're going to be like, this looks horrible. This looks absolutely horrendous because CGI has advanced so much. If a horror movie is made today in 2020 with as great CGI effects as we have, and you watch it 15 years from now, I guarantee you by those standards, it's going to look much worse because computers are ever evolving, but practical effects are now what they always have been. It comes down to the inventiveness of the director, of the team, of the writers, the whole film crew getting together and trying to make something look as real as possible with whatever they have, whatever budget they have, whatever they can buy, whatever they can get their hands on. And it looks great. It looks really good. Nightmare looks really cool. Some of the things look kind of janky. I know when you first see Freddy and he's got like the long spindly arms that maybe if you watched it today, it might not creep you out a whole lot. But I'm telling you, go back and watch it with your child's eye, with your mind's eye, kind of bring yourself back to your childhood. The first time that you saw that happen, it is very off-putting. He's just running so awkwardly. He's got these weird long arms. That's kind of the beauty of Freddy is sometimes he does the weirdest things, but he still catches you off guard. It's still unsettling. It's unnatural. Oh, there's another scene that is just, to me, it was the scariest scene in the movie. The first time, I never will forget, the first time I watched it, it's not even a kill scene. Nancy falls asleep in class and she looks over and her friend, the one who died on the ceiling, is in a body bag. And there's just something so unsettling about her friend in that body bag just kind of reaching out. And oh man, it's so good. And then you see her like just get drugged down the hallway when Nancy comes out in the hallway and you see the blood across the floor. And then Nancy, she looks and she sees her laying there and you see her arm just kind of flop back and then she gets drugged down the hallway. It's such a good scene and no jump scare there. Nothing jumping out at you or over the top. It's so simple, but it is so, there's something so unnerving about that. It's not like seeing a body in a coffin that's been prepared. Someone has taken time to make that person look the way they did when they were alive. It's not like seeing that. This is seeing a person in a body bag. They just died, blood still fresh on them. It's just, I don't know. The first time I saw it, and there are a couple scenes in this movie that'll get you, but the first time I saw this film, I never will forget. That was the one that, if any, kept me up at night. That I thought about later. Something about her friend, the actress. Maybe she just sold it really well. But something about her face when she's in that body bag. It's just, oh man, it's so good. Of course, this movie is a classic. So many good scares. So many good death scenes. So creative. The way Johnny Depp dies, and hey, by the way, points to this movie for giving Johnny Depp his first film role. That's awesome. Johnny Depp's given us a lot of good stuff since then. So great that we got Johnny Depp. But also the way Johnny Depp dies, while it's not the scariest thing in the world, it's so creative, man. He just gets pulled into his bed and he disappears and it's silent for a second. And then that fountain of blood comes just pouring out of the bed and onto the ceiling. And it has that anti-gravity effect, the same effect we saw when Nancy's friend gets killed at the beginning of the movie. The blood just kind of settles on the roof and just expands. It doesn't rain down for a while. Eventually it does. It comes back down and it even soaks through the floor. But it's so much blood though. Like Johnny Depp had a lot of blood in his body. I didn't know the human body should not have that much blood, but that is a lot of blood. Anyway, look, top to bottom, A Nightmare on Elm Street is a classic for a reason, and it's the intelligence. As good a character as Freddy is, and I cannot say enough about Robert Englund's performance as Freddy Krueger. There will never be. We've had others try it, and I'm not saying they did a horrible job, but when you're trying to fill the shoes of Robert Englund, it's not like putting on the Jason mask. It's not like putting on the Michael mask because those characters just don't have personality, not in the same way that Freddy does. Freddy speaks. Freddy taunts. Freddy goes after those kids. He's always talking to them. He has so much personality. He has that growl that there's one point where he sounds just almost like a tiger the way he yells. And I don't know, that may not have been Robert Englund. But Freddy's personality is far and beyond so much better than what you get typically out of a horror movie. So often, so many people have followed that letter where you get a Jason character where it's just a hulking figure. And look, there's nothing, I'm not knocking Jason. Jason is an iconic character, but he is just a killing machine. Jason is just a wrecking ball, and that's awesome. It is. But Freddy kills and has personality. I'm not saying that that's better. I'm not giving anything away from my Jason review or Friday the 13th review, which Jason's not even in that movie. So, but anyway, I'm not giving anything away there. I'm not comparing Freddy and Jason and saying, oh, one's better than the other. I'm simply saying that Robert Englund's performance, you can't just put somebody else behind the mask the way you can with Jason or with Michael. Robert Englund's character, Freddy Krueger, is so iconic and irreplaceable. Thank you, Robert Englund. Let me just say that for giving us one of the greatest horror movie characters of all time. You couple Robert Englund's performance with the cerebral, crazy mind of Wes Craven. What a genius man, taking something the body needs, turning it against you, forcing kids to try to do without something that their body does naturally. So smart. And then you add in that character, Freddy Krueger. You've got a bunch of great kills. You've got a great movie, a good cast. It's really good, guys. Nightmare on Elm Street is top of the line. You know I don't believe in giving out 100s, but Nightmare is so good. I can't really poke any holes in it. There's not a whole lot they could have done better. I'm giving A Nightmare on Elm Street a 96 out of 100. All right, everybody. If you agree with me, tell me what you think about A Nightmare on Elm Street. We're talking about 1984 version. Drop down in the comments. Let me know what you think. If you disagree with me, I would love to hear why. I would love to hear any thoughts opposed to A Nightmare on Elm Street. So if you want to leave those in the comments below, let me know. But just remember, if anything I said about Jason or Michael or whatever made you mad, I'm going to come back. I'm going to do their movie, so relax. It's coming. Just please don't get mad. It's just one man's opinion. Thanks.